Hey everybody, welcome to Astro Roundtable number 2, where the focus today is going to be all about aspects. So I'm going to try and help unpack what aspects are and give a few different lenses for how to look at what they represent and their symbology. So taking it away. So planetary aspects. So these are the symbols and the degrees that you'll see on a chart when they're signifying or showing one of these aspects. And the aspects are indicative of when planets are in a certain geometric connection between each other. It's a certain amount of degrees around the wheel of the zodiac. So when planets are, and we say within an orb, which means, uh, for example, a conjunction is 0 degrees, but a planet, if it's like 5 degrees away, that's still considered a conjunction. The orb for a planet, you'll find in text, it could be anywhere from 1 to 10 at a max, and it usually is bigger, or you allow more of an orb for faster planets, whereas the slower they are, it tends to be a little bit smaller. But within about the closer two planets are to being exactly on top of each other, 0 degrees, that is called a conjunction. And it represents a powerful merging of those two energies coming together. The next one, it's a fairly minor aspect, but I'm including it because I'm going around every 30 degrees around the wheel until we get to halfway. So I've included a couple minor aspects that I will still talk about in this. And the semi-sextile is when two planets are 30 degrees apart, give or take a degree or two. And this is a connection that's fairly neutral, but possibly convenient. And we'll talk about why that is later. The sextile is a very classic aspect. It is 60 degrees. It means that the planets are basically two signs away from one another at the same point, and it is an easy and agreeable relationship between the planets. A square is 90 degrees. We hear about planets being square in astrology all the time. That means that they are 90 degrees apart. And it is a hard type of aspect. It represents some challenges, and it can be either internal or external. The trine aspect is 120 degrees, and that one is just super easy. Those energies are flowing together. So when things are around 120 degrees apart, super easy. This one, a quincunx or inconjunct, is also considered a minor aspect, although I do consider it to have more weight than the semi-sextile. We'll talk about that more later. But it's when planets are around 150 degrees apart. And for the quincunx, the orb is very small regardless of planets. It needs to be 3 max, I think, is about what I've seen. Other places, I have seen cases where, planets could be conjunct close to 10, or in a square or trine, although that's usually if it's like the moon or something very fast again. But back to this quincunx or inconjunct, 150 degrees, and the energy of it is very subtle, a little sneaky. It's often not recognized. We don't look at this aspect a lot, but it does represent some sort of challenging background noise. The opposition is the last one. That's the so-called classic aspects, which is 180 degrees. That means they're sitting exactly opposite each other on the wheel. And it is considered a hard aspect. It is arguably just as loud as the conjunction. The square is also fairly loud. The sextile and trine, by virtue of being so easy, are sometimes you can miss them. They are soft. And then the semi-sextile and quincunx called minor. But again, back to that opposition, it's a hard aspect, and it is typically where we see things externalized. The problems signified in an opposition often show that we're going to see something out in the world that is not us representing that planet's energy. And it's potentially quite fulfilling, though. The butting of the heads in an opposition is also the same energy of like a balanced marriage, depending on how that energy culminates. Back to the square, though, there is a little bit more of a challenge of back and forth as we're stimulating new things. And so that's part of what makes it hard, so to speak. I've also included here an angle that I want to mention for this talk, at least, which is called the quintile. And it is 72 degrees. It's the only aspect that I'm dividing. Basically, you have a circle, which is 360 degrees. And if you divide it into 30, like, each sign is 30 degrees. That's what builds these angles around. But then 72 degrees is the only one that's not a 30 designation. It is dividing 360 by 5, this magic 5 number. And it is kind of like, since it's so close to 60, just a little bit more, it's often like a super special sextile. Or it could be, something that's almost approaching a square, except it's favorable. Quintiles between planets are something where the things are magically synchronized and well elevated and integrated. It's like those two planets are like magically working together in like a superhero type of situation. So they just really speak language well together. And I've added this note that the planets involved also flavor the difficulty or ease of whatever aspect there is having a conversation. And I often think about aspects as a conversation. The two planets are connected in an angle, so they are tuned into one another. And the conversations they're having are different. These are all representative of a different type of conversation, a big merge, a little more neutral, just kind of chit chat, an easy back and forth, kind of a hard, challenging one another, a super easy flowy working together, something where we're kind of missing each other on a teeter totter, and then something where we can seem like we're at ends with each other or we complete one another. And then this quinquile, like, waving a magic wand. So different conversations. And then as you think about the planets, typically easier planets, even when they're in a hard situation, if we have two easy planets having a hard conversation, it's going to be easier than having, two hard planets having a hard conversation. And then if you do have two hard planets, but they're having an easy conversation, then that kind of can mitigate a little bit of those planets' natural difficulty. So this is just kind of a chart to look at the symbols and degrees. Let's move on to look at the aspects as planetary flavors. All of those different degrees, I've tried to illustrate on this diagram here where I show the connections between each sign. And as I look, and we'll look at the next slide, we're going to talk about that more specifically. But we often hear that the different aspects have got an archetype to the conversation that falls with one of the classic planets. And the classic planets are those 7: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, before we found out about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so that first and that most powerful, arguably, aspect of the conjunction, where two planets are, in the same exact spot, they're 0 degrees apart, ideally, is as big and bold in a chart as the sun and the moon. The moon and the sun are the ones we see the biggest in the sky, the moon because it's so close, the sun because it's so big, but they have the most immediate and largest impact on a chart, arguably. They're kind of the central yin and yang identity force of something. And so when there's a conjunction, that conjunction can be thought of to be of the flavor of the sun and the moon. It has importance, it has a powerful prominence, it has a bold expression. Those two planets together are powering each other up by the virtue of whatever they represent and magnifying it. The semisextile, this is a super minor aspect. It's only getting some airtime in my talk, really, because it's exactly 30 degrees. So like if we were to talk about semisextile, it would be like if I had one planet in Aries, something to be 30 degrees apart would either be at that same degree over here in Pisces or that same degree over here in Taurus. And so it's always going to be a neighboring sign. It's your neighbor. It's the next door neighbor. Mercury is the flavor for this. And Mercury and Gemini and all that rules our neighbors, and it's conversations and it's information. And so I think of this aspect as those two planets. If you think of a sign being 30 degrees, and so a planet has to graduate through 30 degrees, 30 steps of maturity to work through the process of one sign before it gets into the next. Well, if a planet is at 12 degrees in Aries, and there's another planet in about 12 degrees of Taurus or Pisces, being at that same degree point, they've worked through the same amount or the same maturity of a sign in that sequence. And so there's a recognition like, hey, back there or up there, you're going to be doing this up here. And it's like passing notes back and forth. There's a recognition that that planet is right there to my left, exactly 30 degrees, or right there to my right. And so it can build some sort of familiarity between those two planets by virtue of those two signs being in a sequential order where one is going to precede the other and have some of what it needs, and the one that comes after flows. All the signs have a relationship with their neighbors, and so a semi-sextile suggests that two planets that might not have anything in common by virtue of being different elements, different modalities, different polarities, all of that. They're neighbors, and so there is maybe some connection between those two planets as opposed to none. Sextile, all the others are going to be louder. Sextile, 60 degrees, is of the nature of Venus. And so I'm going to use just Aries as my good old starting point. So for something to be 60 degrees, it would have to be two signs down at the same exact point in Aquarius, or two signs down at the exact same degree, 60 degrees away, in Gemini. What we notice is that from Aries to get to Aquarius or Gemini, it is going to hit an air element, which is favorable to fire. Fire and air get along. They relate well because they're both yang elements. So a sextile will generally put two planets that are in a similar element. Either it'll match air and fire, or it'll match water and earth, typically, unless you have planets on the cusp. There's cuspy relationships by degrees. But because it typically will put them there, it is an easy relating and exchange between those planets. They're both speaking the same polarity. They both want to either hold things together or take action in some way. And so there's some sort of favorable relating between a sextile. Those two planets are agreeable, the same way that Venus represents agreeability, harmony, pleasantness. So all of the associations of Venus we bring into the conversation when two planets, whoever they are 60 degrees apart. They're having a harmonious conversation, a Venusian conversation. Moving forward to the square, 90 degrees is a Martian conversation, and Mars is the god of war, which is our first indication that a square is a challenge, is a hard aspect. If you think about the language of when things are squaring off, that is typically a fight, a clash, a challenge. So from Mars, it goes 90 degrees away to hit a planet in Capricorn in that direction, or 90 degrees away to hit a planet in Cancer. So it will run into a planet that is in the same modality. We have Aries is cardinal. Well, Capricorn and Cancer are both cardinal, but they are both opposite polarity. They are yin, water and earth, whereas Aries is fire and yang. And so I am hitting up against another energy that wants to behave in the same manner, cardinal, take action, whatever the modality is, or two fixed signs, we both want to hold on and sustain, or two mutable, we both want to learn, change, and grow. But with its Mars, they both want to do things the same way, but they both want to do it by the virtue of different elements. And those elements clash. As far as, with this case, Aries taking action, or being, secure at home, or achieving a goal and getting recognition. They have different goals or endpoints to why and how they want to be cardinal and take action. So there is some frustration between the two. It's like they're both trying to act at the same time, and it frustrates the other, but at the same time, it charges the other one up into stimulated action. So one of them takes action and it kind of pushes against the other one. And that stimulates and pushes the other one, because Mars is a planet of activity, of action. The square is probably arguably one of the most dynamic active forces, other than the conjunction. The conjunction, though, they just merge and melt together. But the square, they goad each other. A trine, 120 degrees, is of the nature of Jupiter. And we can see that by that point, 120 degrees puts us over in Sagittarius from Aries, or over in Leo. And the key thing with a trine is that if you have, a planet in each element at the same point, you'd have a triangle drawn on there. You'd have a grand trine. because the trine shows we're going to run into another planet of the same element. And by being the same element, that is one of the best indicators of the same language. Fire gets along with fire better than others. It's all about identity. It's all about energy. Air is all going to be talking about social and intellectual. Water is going to be talking all about an emotional, feeling relational. Earth is going to be talking all about practical, work, health, all that kind of stuff. So they're speaking the same language of the same element. And then they're going to run into a sequence of one of them is going to be one modality and another is going to be another. But in a triangle, they all flow. If you have one cardinal and one fixed, that's great. If you have one cardinal and one mutable, hey, they still flow in. You have one fixed and one mutable, they flow. So there's a flow, the same element, and it's connecting a flow between those elements and how they want to work so that you get good fortune and flow for easy growth anytime two planets are 120 degrees apart. The inconjunct or quincunx is 150 degrees. And this one's it's a non-traditional aspect. It is not the easiest to put into this analogy of planets. And I call this one the wild card. I'm really not even going to say it's part of Saturn because it's so dependent. But if we started over here in Aries and we went 150 degrees, that's going to get us over here in Scorpio that way, or it's going to get us over here in Virgo that way. Either way, fire is not hooking up with an air or a fire sign since it's water and earth, and it's cardinal. Well, it would run into something fixed with Scorpio or something mutable with Virgo. And so they are different elements that want different things, and they're working through modality in a different way. They have nothing in common with Aries. So when planets are 150 degrees apart in a quincunx, those planets do not get each other. They really don't even kind of see each other at the table. You think about if we were sitting at a table, you're going to know who your neighbors are. And then right next to them, there's kind of like you might overhear some of that conversation and add into it. There's something that kind of clashes, this, or, they're not talking the same thing or on different pages. Over here, it's like there's a really, great synergy. You're seeing things the right way. These two seats, we just don't get each other. And we'll talk about the last one in a second. But with these two that don't get each other, it's almost like one of them may activate and the other one doesn't get to, or it's not being expressed or seen at all. It's like peekaboo. While one of them's working, the other one's not. And then while that one's working, the other one's not. And so it's kind of like a teeter-totter back and forth. One gets a turn or the other gets a turn. And so they don't see each other. And so they could activate at the expense, neglect, or inconvenience of the other energy. Sometimes they might be both doing their own thing and just unaware of how the other planet is in that situation. It's like they don't see it, it's got blinders. And sometimes by both being active, it can magnify the themes of those two planets together, almost like a conjunction, but they're not working in the same place, in the same way. They're working at the same time for different goals in different places. And so there's a lot of dissonance. Luckily, in that this is a minor aspect, it's often something we don't notice, we don't see it, and it's in the background, but it can become that background noise that drives a lot of the other things because it's happening without any kind of awareness or treatment or recognition. So the quincunx or inconjunct is a minor aspect that can sneak up on you. Last one, the opposition right across the table, 180 degrees. That is of the nature of Saturn. If you think about, Saturn is the furthest planet away in that classic 7 from the, starting from, the sun. It is the furthest away on the table to be 180 degrees. And there is something about the opposition that externalizes. We see a conflict that's out there. The square sometimes can be a conflict that's represented in something external, but it can also be an internal challenge of two forces. But an opposition, we are much more likely to see out there, expressed through some other party, some external circumstances, is challenging. Often we will, in an opposition, feel that we play one character and someone else or some other force plays the other character. And that's, that we're doing things one way and that other thing is doing something so other that it's frustrating us, it's not allowing us, it's challenging us. But the truth in the opposition is that that other side is actually necessary to complete and fulfill what's going on in that situation. It's a marriage, it's a balancing act where they're integrating to work together as a culmination. Opposite signs are married. Um, so they're keenly aware, and it can present as a conflict to the degree that we let it be that. But just like Saturn will limit or break things or create a challenge or stop us in one way, the opposition can too. Saturn is also the force which graduates or achieves or recognizes, completes, crystallizes, all of that. So there's also this ability to hold both things steady apart, balance, that creates like a fulfillment and a mastery in an opposition, a mastery between those two planets' forces. But in an opposition, they definitely see each other, they know the other one exists, and it's either they are working together or feel like they're working apart. Backing it up with that in conjunct, sometimes they don't even see that other planet. They don't know they're at the table. They don't, that energy can kind of be aloof. So that is thinking about each of these as a planet. So those relationships. Let's look at it through another lens. Aspects are originally created because they are, besides that geometric degrees between things, the planets, if you take 360 degrees and divide it by 30, you get 12 signs. And so aspects are really talking about how each sign gets along with each other sign. Given any sign as a starting point, aspects reflect the various elements and modality combos among them. And I've kind of alluded to this in the last one. And, starting with Aries again, 30 degrees is the neighbors. Or, if we go over here and start with Cancer, its neighbors are going to be Gemini and Leo. So those planets, let's do that. I'm going to start from Cancer. So Leo and Gemini are the neighbors. There's nothing in common. They're different elements, they're different modalities, but they're familiar by proximity and sequence. Cancer knows who Gemini is because it just came out of all of that. And it knows who Leo is because it's kind of building itself toward that. And so since they're in that sequence on both sides, they can pass notes back and forth. There's a neutrality and some communicative convenience in that 30-degree connection. 2 doors down, 60 degrees, Cancer would be talking with its buddy Virgo or its buddy Taurus. And through that, since they are earth signs, and that which is a feminine or yin polarity, and so is Cancer's water sign, they are both talking about things being kind of calm and stabilized. Air and fire likes to excite things and volatilize. Water and earth likes to calm and stabilize. So they're speaking a similar language. So those 2 doors down, Cancer is going to be really friendly with Virgo and complementary. Talking about nutrition and food, and going together for health and nutrition aspect. Talking friendly with Taurus is going to be more, hey, food tastes good and this is a comfortable experience, but they're going to have things in common. 3 doors down, we're butting heads from Cancer, we're butting heads with Libra, or we're butting heads with Aries. These are 2 yang elements, fire and air, and Cancer is yin. They're all cardinal, so they all want to start things. Cancer wants to start getting comfortable and securing things on the home front, whereas Libra wants to start going out and socializing and initiating relationships. And Aries wants to just start doing all sorts of bold, reckless actions, which that doesn't jive with the protection, incubation, security of Cancer. And going out and being all social is not exactly going out in, the home front and the security of Cancer. So there's some challenge. Cancer wants to be home and nesting and cozy. There's some challenge between the mode of operation between, what do you call it? Libra and Aries. 4 doors down, 120 degrees, Cancer is going to run into its buddies, Scorpio and Pisces, the other water element. So it's the same element. It's a super easy flow. It gets along great. Cancer is all about its personal emotions, and then Scorpio is all about our shared secrets and emotional intimacies, and then Pisces about the collective emotions and feelings in general and existential. So, I mean, we've got feelings everywhere, whether we're starting things and acting out of feelings, or holding and sustaining feelings, or releasing and learning through feelings, whatever, it's all the same thing. So it's an easy relationship. 5 doors down for Cancer, 150 degrees. I was going to put it up with Aquarius and Sagittarius. It has nothing in common with them. It's Yang, fire and air, against Yin, water. It's a mutable sign and a fixed sign, while Cancer is cardinal. So nothing in common, an awkward lack of awareness. Think about what they stand for. Uh, Sagittarius wants to go explore the world and travel far and wide. Aquarius wants to do things that break the mold and shock and rebel and all of that. Cancer wants comfort at home. So you got, we're not like traveling about. It's not like rocking the boat and being shocking. It's about holding things comfortable and secure at home. So there's nothing in common with those two. And so when those planets and lack of awareness, it's one gets a turn while the other doesn't, where they're both happening at the same time, and it's weird for each of the others. And then finally, 6 doors down, 180 degrees. You go across there, and Cancer would find its opposite, Capricorn. But you think about, Cancer's mama, Capricorn's daddy a lot, the internal and the external authority on that parental axis. So the opposite, it's a complementary element. Hey, it's earth and water. We get along. We both want stabilization. It's this same modality. Hey, it's cardinal. We both want to take action. So it becomes, hey, do we either make it all about Cancer and the home front security, or do we make it all about career and worldly security? Or do we see how they work together, so that by having a comfortable nest that's well rested, I'm able to go out and do the hard things in the world to achieve my goals. And by going out and mastering the world at large and achieving my goals and getting recognition, I'm able to build and secure and pad my nest to the most comfortable degree. They work together unless they want to seem at ends with each other. All the opposite signs can battle it out and hash it out until they figure out how they are working together for the same thing ultimately on that axis. But so you can do that with any of the signs. I've kind of played with a couple of them, and play with all of them. But it's really thinking about each sign as a character and how they would relate to every other character at that table. And depending on how far away they are at this round table, how many doors down, how many degrees, that determines what type of conversation they're having and how the planets that are that far apart will interact together. And of course, again, you have to consider the nature of the two planets having a conversation. The planets have a personality too, just as the signs do and just as the aspects do. The last way I think I'm looking at these aspects is as phasal connections. And when I say that, I'm thinking of phases like we think of phases of the moon. And so really the only ones I'm going to focus on is how we have with the moon. You have a new moon phase and a full moon phase, and it goes around, it gets bigger, it waxes, it wanes. Well, the new moon phase, if you think about what a new moon is in an astrology chart, that's where the moon is going to be conjunct the sun. They're both conjunct. They both are speaking the same language. So a new moon is literally the moon and the sun together. And so it's like a conception. It's like the getting it on. It's the beginning of two themes merging together. So it's like a marriage. The sun and the moon get into bed together. They merge, they join, they blend. And so any two planets that are conjunct merge. They're starting they're starting new life. They're creating a new situation. And so it's a bold merging at that conjunction. The other elements or the other aspects is really better to understand by virtue of this whole sign relations or the planetary aspects. To get that, we don't really focus on the other moon phases. We understand waxing. We do talk about the square. And so it is, there's two squares. You'd have a new moon and then square, full moon, and then another quarter moon square, and then back around. So there's four main moon phases, just as there are four seasons, four angles. And so that square is when the moon is half full. One time it's going to be on one side, and then on the other, it's going to be on the other side. But so the square is a quarter moon. And anytime we have a quarter moon, that is going to be where you have the moon square the sun. And the moon squaring the sun is going to represent a point of tension between those two planets. With the actual moon and the sun, you have some tension between your wants and your needs, between your feelings and your identity, your past and your present. I mean, there's some quintessential tension internally when the sun is square the moon. But when any planets are square one another, that same feeling, that point of tension where you feel pulled in both directions. You want to go forward, you want to go back, the past, the future. Are we remembering the building phase, or are we approaching the completing phase? We're at that midpoint of tension that's equal, like an equinox. And so those equal points, those square quarter phases are indicative of when planets are square one another, and that tension and why these are the three loudest aspects. The other aspects are more subtle, I believe, because the planetary phasing is loudest at these junctures: the conjunction, the two square points on both sides, and then the loudest, another loud one, the opposition. And the opposition is like a full moon. You can always tell when someone's born on a full moon because the sun and the moon are opposite in their charts. And so any opposition is like a full moon culminating between those two planets. It's just as bold as the conjunction, except instead of a conception, it's a culmination. Instead of something being started or beginning in that peak intensity, if you think about the intensity of what it takes to make a baby, to conceive a child, that's an intensity. The same way when you are giving birth to a child, that's quite an intense experience also. The opposition is that intensity. It's the culmination and birth and completion. The project that incubated is complete and hatches, related to those two energies. And so those two energies have got a tension between them pulling, as something is externalized, it's birthed at that opposition point, and it's got something of both to it. It's a marriage. The same way the conjunction is both together, the culmination might seem opposite and at different sides, but it's also working both of them together. And whether or not we are aware of that is typically what determines whether or not an opposition is more favorable or more frustrating, how well we've integrated those two energies. If you've integrated them well, the opposition is like a graduation and an applause and a completion and culmination. If you haven't integrated those two energies, it's a battle. It's like which one's going to win and something might break. I've added the notes that the faster planet is generally perceived to be the moon in this phasal consideration, and the slower planet plays the sun in these contemplations. So when you're looking at a natal chart, whatever is faster, the fastest thing in a chart is the moon, fasting Mercury, the sun, Venus, and then slower planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. The planets that are slower act as the base, and then the faster planet would be like the moon that goes around in 28 days that's circulating it. So you see it that way. However, when you're looking at your chart, if you had a planet, let's look at Venus here. If I had Venus and Taurus here in my chart, and then we had a planet, Mars or Pluto over here across transiting opposite it in Scorpio, that would be a culminating theme that is related to Venus as the anchor, and then Mars and Pluto, it's culminating the Mars and Pluto energy. I've given an example here too with Venus opposite Neptune in a natal chart. If you have Venus at one point and Neptune at the other, Venus would be expressing the culmination of the Neptunian themes. But if we had a transiting Neptune, if you had Venus down here and Neptune opposing it, during their lifetime, it's a Neptunian culmination of the Venusian themes. So in any phasal relationship, you got to think which one is moving. If it's transiting, the transiting planet is moving while the natal planet is the base. If we're considering two natal planets, the slower planet was moving less, so it is the base, while the faster planet is moving quicker. So it is the satellite, the moon, in that connection. So that more or less concludes the different views I wanted to share for the aspects. So we've looked at them again as the phasal connections. We've looked at them as the whole sign relations. We've looked at them as the planetary flavors. And we've thought about just, what their symbols and degrees are. So hopefully this helps to clarify or bring some insights in about what some aspects might be in your own natal chart, or how to consider some aspects from transits, or even in synastry or composites. All aspects are going to basically follow this symbology. So as I'm finishing up today, I did not have anybody that was able to make it live, but I did have a question that came in from our friend Jennifer, and Jennifer was asking about transits to look out for over the next couple of weeks or whatnot. And she was asking more personally, but I'm gonna start with just the weather bit, and then I'll take my screen away and talk to Jennifer for a second. But if we were talking about aspects to be on the lookout for this week and what's going on right now, I actually posted something on my Lead into Gold Facebook page where I wrote up a few things that happened this past weekend, because boy, was it a big weekend. So I'm going to talk about those things real quick. So in the weather right now, the sun just went into Leo a couple days ago, and around this past weekend. And so at the same time, back when that happened, and it's still active, you can see Mercury was square Uranus at 22. So that square between Mercury and Uranus is going to have all sorts of sudden, unexpected, shocking conversations, information coming out. It is just shocking information and conversations that have a disruptive, unexpected quality to them. So that was in the mix. The sun, as it changed into Leo, as it crossed there, it had its opposition to Pluto, and both of those planets are square the nodal axis right now, and the nodes just changed from being in Scorpio and Taurus to now being in Aries and Libra. And so that's got a lot to it. So first of all, the sun opposing Pluto is going to be a culmination. It is a peak. It is a pop of the force of our self, our identity, our sovereignty, our rulership, our identity, who we are, how we roar, and then forces that are controlling. Pluto is all about things that are hidden, that are psychological, that are deep, that are karmic, that are forces controlling. And so this past weekend and this energy is all about the idea of being confronted with external circumstances that are somehow attempting to control our identity, control our expression, our freedom of sovereignty, or the way that we're trying to do that. But it's all about the control games related to somebody's identity, their central identity expression and all of that. So it can be challenges of authority, or having our authority challenged. All of those motifs. What makes this interesting is sun just going into Leo, the sign that it rules. That is the sign Leo is all about. I am king. Hear me roar. It rules that sign. And going from Cancer to Leo, Cancer is like we're incubating. I'm congealing my sense of self. I'm nurturing it. I'm protecting it and incubating it. And then as soon as we get into Leo, it hatches. It hatches into the light. It wants to be in the spotlight and be seen loud and proud and roar. And so by virtue of it's almost like there's a challenge to authority or an attempt to control or keep things in control. And then Leo is now got 30 days to say, hey, here I am and hear me roar. And so the sun is in a power position in its ruling sign. It's not going, it's as it moves forward, it's getting further and further away from Pluto anyway. And so that peak of control is passing, but it was there. Another possible positive connotation to that is, since it's a culmination, if it's not represented in a control struggle, it can be the representative of the idea of two powerful identities or forces merging and coming together in some sort of powerful way. Because Pluto through virtue of Scorpio, and it's power battles and clashes if it's not merging, but it does have that merging motif. Square the nodal axis for both of these planets doing that opposition dance. We've had this kind of feeling of being caught between the past and the future, where we've been and what's familiar and what's comfortable and how things have been and where things are going and how we are moving forward. Just by squaring that, the nodes have just changed their flavor too. So where we've been and where are we going? Well, where we've been is about the familiarity. In the past with the Scorpio and Taurus, we've had this familiarity with other people's resources and how what we've invested to and what we have through other people while we're developing our own values, our own self-sustainability and all of that. So we're still using what we have that shares our value through other people while we develop and sustain our own unshakableness. That has now shifted to where the past is in our relating, our compromising, our negotiating, being peaceful, being harmonious. We're still using those assets, but that's the past. As we move into more independence, confidence, assertiveness, action, raw identity. So there's that also by virtue of that North Node going into Aries as the sun is going into Leo. Those are huge signs for my identity, me, myself, and I. I'm dependent. You can't tell me what to do. I'm my own unique, special person. Those are loud energies, loud, commanding leadership energies that are focal for this next 30 days by the sun being in Leo. And for the next year and a half, while the North Node is learning and growing us in Aries, while we're letting go of some of our over superficiality or diplomacy, we're letting go of compromising things in an unfair fashion while still using our ability to compromise and find the beauty and all of this Libran qualities. So that's happened in the recent mix. Venus just went retrograde. Venus retrograde is going to mean we have it's going to happen all the way through September, and then it's going to take her about through October to get back to where she was. So we have at least a month or two of reviewing relationships, reviewing our values, reviewing our finances. All of the things related to Venus: money, purchases, pleasure, ease, socializing, love, romance, they're under review. Things related to them from the past could come up. Past purchases could bite us in the butt, have to take things back that we purchased. People from our past may show up again. Here come all the exes. We can have situations involving people where we have to review the agreements, review the harmony, review all of these qualities related to Libra, related to the agreements, the contracts, the relating, the money, the finances, all of that stuff. Since it's in Leo, as the sun is in during this Leo season, there's going to be some tendencies to like have our ego and what we love maybe a little bit too proud, too loud, and the idea of going within and seeing what loves and what joys are true to our specialness and our heart, and which ones are just superficial expressions that we're seeking attention for. We're seeking applause or seeking ego satisfaction or some sense of frivolous or superficial values versus the values that truly sing from our heart, our creativity, our specialness. And so that's what's got to be reviewed and uncovered through this retrograde period, as well as our relationships. Which relationships are true and authentic and are generous and loving and all of that, and which ones are all pomp and flair or superficiality or display or all of those things. So that's through the Venus retrograde. And in this past week, it's starting to finish, but we've had Mars opposite Saturn, which is another opposition that either shows the culmination and completion of some effort, some hard work or some task, having the energy to finally get to the tippy top of that mountain, or some reason why, oof, we got knocked down from that mountain. It's a challenge. It could be one of those challenge or delays and frustrations of our willpower and desire, or one of those completion graduations, kind of like, hey, we've made it solid at another level, um, and or hey, we've bottom fell out and we've got to rebuild. Sometimes it's a paradox of both of those things, but Mars has had that in the mix too. So thinking about the loudest elements of our current weather. And then if the question was extended to, well, what do we look forward to over the next few weeks? Venus will retrograde as Mercury moves forward into a point of conjunction. And when we have Mercury and Mercury or Hermes and Venus or Aphrodite together, the hermaphrodite, you have a nice blending between opposites. It's a moment of agreement. It's a moment of negotiation. It's a moment for the good deal. But it's a good deal while Venus is going backwards. So it's like, it's a good deal on something we have to go back to, something we have to review. It's like there's a reviewing quality, but it's like something agreeable about it, which will continue until, again, when Mercury meets Venus moving forward again eventually in a different sign. But there's some sort of moment of agreement in this review process and in the midst of all of these other clashes and challenges of like Mars opposite Saturn and Sun opposite Pluto. Um, a moment of agreement is on the horizon, as is perhaps as Mars continues over the next few days or week or two. Nine, it's about at 10 degrees. As it gets closer to its trine, which it's already kind of in with Jupiter, our efforts and our willpower and our action will tend to have more beneficial, fruitful, fortunate, opening, growth outcomes as we get further and further away from the lock-in we had with Saturn. So we do have that with Mars to look forward to. Other hard things, other things in general. Um, we will see with the sun as it goes a little bit deeper into Leo, it will at a point make itself square to Jupiter, which is a point of exuberance. It could be a point of too much or overconfidence or over exuberance at that point. That would be about 10 days away. But those are what I see kind of for the biggest transits of the weather. Last thing I'm going to share on this video, and if you're still watching, you can tune this out unless you are Jennifer, because this was for Jennifer. So I've stopped sharing my screen, although I will zip over here and pull up Jennifer's chart for a second. And if I was looking at how that weather and the transits right now are affecting Jennifer, it looks like that Venus retrograde and all that Leo energy is in the 6th house. And so we are going to see the potential for coworkers to be where the relationships are getting reviewed, where there could be, in the work environment, things with people, old coworkers or past coworkers, things that are, being redone in the work environment related to maybe the flow for other people, for socializing, or for ease or comfort and pleasure, those qualities. There does look to be a fairly significant challenge in this time zone since the sun is making a square to Pluto and Mars and the moon over this time period, over the next few days and whatnot. And at the same time, Mercury and Venus is going to retrograde back into a square with Saturn. Um, is the idea, and then as Mars is in the seventh house now, and challenges from other people. People are either going to be passionately working together with you or passionately working against you. And I think that again, the work environment, that sixth house, and then Mars and Virgo is both speaking the same language, saying your main interactions with coworkers and or the people you work for, that you're a servant for, could be the most frustrating, the most challenging, the hardest ones to make a deal with or to find an agreeable situation. It's like, having to rework things to be agreeable for other people, perhaps coworkers at this time. Health indications, perhaps also in the sixth house. If there's anything with health that we're looking at, redoing our diet, rethinking our sweets, all of those types of review qualities could be in the air too. So that's what I would tell Jennifer for this little bit. All right. Well, I am wrapping that up for everybody. I hope that everyone has found something enjoyable and insightful from this exploration involving what aspects are and how to think of them, as well as a little bit about what our current planetary weather has been. So, as always, get in touch if you'd like any more specific personal readings or sessions. I will do another Astro roundtable in August, I believe around August 22nd. So if you enjoyed this and you'd like to come and be here live in person where you can talk, ask questions, interact, talk to me, visit my website, and grab yourself a ticket to RSVP. All right, everybody have a great night. Later.